Hi, my name is Madison Clark. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how my aunt tried to charge me for my own childhood. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment where you're watching from. Your Honor, I present my invoice, my Aunt Brenda announced, her voice echoing with false piety in the silent courtroom. She slid a thin manila folder across the polished wood toward the judge's bench. Inside was a bill for $50,000, a charge she claimed I owed her for the immense sacrifice of raising me after my mom's death. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. My hands, resting on the table in front of me, began to shake. The amount was absurd, but it was the principle that stole the air from my lungs. She had put a price tag on my grief, on my entire childhood. She thought I was the same scared, helpless little girl she had always known. But I had something she didn't know about, a folder of my own, filled with evidence that would unravel every lie she had ever told. My world ended when I was 8 years old, not with a bang, but with the sterile, deafening silence of a hospital waiting room. One moment, my mom was the center of my universe, a warm sun who smelled of vanilla and Johnson's baby powder, her laugh the music that filled our tiny apartment. The next, she was a memory, a ghost in an empty room. The official word was a car accident, a drunk driver who ran a red light. But for me, it was simpler. The world had just stopped. My father was a name on a birth certificate, a phantom I'd never met. So when the social worker with sad eyes and a kind smile asked me about other family, only one name came to mind: Aunt Brenda. My mother's older sister arrived at the Children's Services Center looking flustered, her coat thrown hastily over a bright floral dress. She hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace that felt more like she was holding a bag of groceries than a grieving child. "Oh, you poor thing," she'd whispered, her voice a mix of pity and inconvenience. "Don't you worry. You'll come live with me. We'll make it work." That phrase, "we'll make it work," became the mantra of my childhood, a constant reminder that my existence was a problem to be solved, an equation that never quite balanced. Her house in the suburbs was a universe away from the small city apartment I'd shared with my mom. It was a 2-story colonial with a manicured lawn and a basketball hoop over the garage. For my cousins, Lisa, who was a year older than me, and Mark, who was 2 years younger, it was a palace of suburban comfort. Their rooms were filled with toys, posters, and the latest gadgets. They had friends over for sleepovers, their laughter echoing down the hallway as I lay in my own room, a converted storage space in the attic, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a house that would never truly be my home. The attic was my designated space. A small triangular room with a sloping ceiling that I couldn't stand up straight in on one side. A single bare bulb hung from a cord in the center, casting long, dancing shadows on the exposed beams. It was freezing in the winter, the wind whistling through the eaves and stiflingly hot in the summer, the air thick and smelling of dust and old memories. My bed was a lumpy mattress on the floor, and my clothes were kept in cardboard boxes pushed against the wall. Those clothes were another daily reminder of my status. I was the recipient of Lisa's cast-offs. I'd wait for the seasonal changing of the closets, when a garbage bag of Lisa's old clothes would be unceremoniously dropped at the foot of the attic stairs for me. They were always either too big or too small, stained with the ghosts of meals I hadn't eaten and memories I hadn't made. I spent years with my sleeves rolled up and the waistbands of my jeans cinched tight with a belt, feeling like an imposter in someone else's skin. Meals were the most potent form of exile. The family, Aunt Brenda, Uncle Robert, Lisa, and Mark, ate together in the dining room, a cheerful space with a large oak table and windows overlooking the garden. I was not permitted to join them. My place was at the small, chipped formica counter in the kitchen, perched on a wobbly stool. Brenda would hand me my plate, often smaller portions, or the leftovers from the previous night, and I would eat in silence, the clinking of their silverware and the murmur of their conversations a world away. I learned to eat quickly, to make myself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The message was clear and constant. I was not one of them. I was a guest, and a temporary, burdensome one at that. The holidays were spectacles of targeted humiliation. At Thanksgiving, my cousins would talk about their school projects and sports teams, while I was tasked with refilling drinks and clearing plates before the main course was even finished. One Christmas when I was 12 has been seared into my memory forever. The living room was a mountain of brightly wrapped presents. Lisa got a brand new 10-speed bicycle and a stereo for her room. Mark got a PlayStation, his whoops of joy filling the house. I watched from the corner, my stomach in a tight knot of hope and dread. Finally, Brenda handed me a single small box wrapped in leftover paper. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tore it open to find a set of beige dish towels. "There," Brenda said with a thin, satisfied smile. "You can use these to help me with the chores. It's important you learn to earn your keep in this world." Lisa and Mark snickered. Uncle Robert just grunted from behind his newspaper. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't a daughter, a niece, or a cousin. I was a chore, a charity case, a lesson in gratitude that the rest of them got to watch. My school life was an extension of this isolation. I was terrified to make friends because I knew I could never invite them over. How could I explain my attic room? How could I explain why I wasn't allowed to eat with the family? Once in 5th grade, a girl named Sarah invited me to her birthday party. It was a sleepover. When I asked my aunt if I could go, she sighed heavily. "Madison, these things cost money. I'd have to buy a gift. Do you have any idea how tight things are?" The guilt was a heavy cloak she draped over me. I lied to Sarah the next day, telling her I was sick. I spent that Saturday night in my attic room, listening to the sounds of my cousins watching a movie downstairs, imagining the fun Sarah and her friends were having, the ache of loneliness so sharp it felt like a physical pain. Brenda's words were the background music of my life, a constant, looping track of my own inadequacy. "Be grateful, Madison. Some children have nothing. Don't be so sensitive, it's not always about you. You cost a fortune to feed, you know that." She wielded my dependency like a weapon, ensuring I knew that every bite of food, every thread of clothing was a gift I could never repay. Love was not a currency in that house, debt was. And my balance was always in the red. I grew up believing I was fundamentally worthless, a burden whose only purpose was to be grateful for the scraps I was thrown. It was a lie I would spend the next decade of my life trying to unlearn. The moment I turned 18, I packed my few belongings, the mismatched clothes and the handful of books I'd managed to collect, into 2 cardboard boxes and left. I didn't have a plan, just a fierce, desperate need for air. My destination was the State University 4 hours away, a place where no one knew my history, where I could invent a new version of myself. I had been accepted through a program for low-income students, and the combination of scholarships, grants, and a mountain of student loans was just enough to cover tuition and a bed in a crowded dorm room. For the first time, my life was my own, and the terror of that freedom was eclipsed only by its exhilarating relief. College was a brutal, relentless grind. While other students went to football games or spring break trips, I worked. I had 3 jobs that I juggled around my classes. From 6 to 8 in the morning, I was part of the university's cleaning crew, scrubbing toilets and mopping floors in the academic buildings, my head still foggy with sleep. Between classes, I worked in the campus library, the quiet monotony of shelving books a welcome respite. My nights and weekends were spent waiting tables at a greasy diner off campus, where my pockets would fill with crumpled dollar bills that smelled of stale coffee and fried onions. I lived on burnt coffee from the diner, instant ramen, and the stale bagels my manager would let me take home at the end of a shift. I was perpetually exhausted, my body aching and my mind frayed. But every dollar I earned, every textbook I bought with my own money, was a declaration of independence. It was proof that I could not only survive, but I could build something of my own, away from the suffocating weight of my aunt's charity. That relentless drive propelled me through my undergraduate degree and straight into law school. It was a logical choice, born from a deep-seated desire to fight for people who had been rendered voiceless, people who had been told they were worthless. I knew what it felt like to be powerless, and I was determined to spend my life tipping the scales of justice, even just a little. Law school was even more demanding, but my capacity for work was boundless. I graduated in the top 10% of my class, a fact I never shared with my aunt. My success was my own, a private victory I refused to let her tarnish. After passing the bar, I accepted a position at a small but tenacious firm in the city that specialized in family law and advocacy for minors. It felt like coming full circle. I was good at my job. I understood the nuances of manipulation, the quiet poison of emotional abuse, and the ways in which financial control could be a cage. I bought myself a small condo in a converted warehouse downtown, a space with high ceilings, exposed brick, and a large window that let in the morning light. It was the first place that truly felt like home. I filled it with plants, secondhand furniture I lovingly restored, and shelves upon shelves of books. It was my sanctuary. The years of minimal contact with Aunt Brenda had settled into a predictable, sterile pattern. She'd call on my birthday and Christmas, our conversations stilted and brief. She'd ask if I was making good money, her tone implying that she was somehow entitled to a report on my finances. I kept my answers vague, my life a closed book she was no longer permitted to read. I thought we had reached a kind of cold, unspoken truce. I was out of her house, and she was out of my life. That illusion was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office, reviewing depositions for a custody case, when my assistant buzzed me. "Madison, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says it's a legal matter." Confused, I told her to send him in. He was a process server, a man with an impassive face who handed me a thick manila envelope, uttered the words, "You've been served," and walked out. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. My legal mind raced through possibilities. A disgruntled former client? A mistake? I sliced it open with trembling fingers. The legal jargon jumped off the page, but the names were what made my breath catch in my throat. Brenda Harrison, plaintiff, versus Madison Clark, defendant. My stomach plummeted. It was a lawsuit, a formal, vicious legal assault. She was suing me for $50,000 for retroactive child support and associated care expenses. Attached to the formal complaint was the invoice. It was a masterpiece of malicious fiction, typed out on cheap computer paper. I read it, my disbelief curdling into a rage so profound it made me dizzy. Item: shelter, 10 years or 150 month, 18,000 item, food and groceries, estimated, 2,500 item, maternal guidance and moral, upbringing, 4,500 hours or 250 HR, 11,250 item, emotional labor and trauma counseling, incalculable, discounted to, 5,000 item, transportation to school and activities, 2,250 item, character building chore instruction, 1,000 grand. Total, 50,000 character building chore instruction. She was charging me for the privilege of scrubbing her floors. Maternal guidance. She was billing me for every time she told me I was ungrateful. It was so grotesque, so deeply twisted, that a part of me wanted to laugh, but the anger was a roaring fire in my chest. This wasn't about money. This was about power. This was her final, desperate attempt to put me back in my place, to chain me to the past with a debt she had invented. As the fury washed over me, a memory surfaced, cold and clear. I was 15, searching for a stamp in the drawer of the cluttered desk in their den. My fingers brushed against a stack of official-looking bank statements. My aunt's name was at the top. Curious, I glanced at the transactions. I saw the words, U.S. Treasury SEC, next to a deposit of over $1,000. I saw another a month later and another. I didn't fully understand it then, but I knew it was government money. I also remembered finding a thick life insurance policy document with my mother's name on it in that same drawer a year later, with Brenda listed as the beneficiary, for the care of Madison Clark. She had been cashing checks meant for me for 10 years. She had been paid, and paid well, for her sacrifice. She was counting on me being too broken, too intimidated, or too ignorant of the past to fight back. She had miscalculated spectacularly. The lawsuit was a declaration of war, and she had just handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my closet for a full hour, feeling like a soldier choosing her armor. Every outfit felt wrong. Too bold, too timid, too bright, too drab. Finally, I settled on a simple charcoal gray suit, a white silk blouse, and low, practical heels. It was professional, unassuming, and severe. It was the armor of an attorney, not the tattered clothes of a victim. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun, every strand in place. My reflection in the mirror was a stranger, a woman with hard lines around her eyes and a jaw set with grim determination. There was no trace of the scared little girl in the attic. I had to believe that. Walking into the courthouse felt like walking into a theater where I was the unwilling star of a tragedy. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee. My aunt and her lawyer were already seated at the plaintiff's table. Brenda was wearing a pale pink twin set, a string of faux pearls at her neck. She looked soft, matronly, and aggrieved. She had mastered the art of playing the victim. In the gallery behind her sat the jury of my past, my cousins Lisa and Mark, along with a handful of aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years. Lisa caught my eye and gave me a look that was a potent cocktail of pity and disdain. Mark just stared at his hands, his shoulders slumped. The others whispered behind their hands, their gazes flicking towards me, full of morbid curiosity. They had all come to watch the ungrateful orphan get her just desserts. The weight of their judgment was a physical pressure, making it hard to breathe. When the judge called her to the stand, Brenda moved with a practiced slowness, as if burdened by the weight of her own goodness. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore the oath, her voice trembling slightly for effect. Her lawyer, a smarmy man with slicked back hair, began with a gentle, leading question. Mrs. Harrison, could you please tell the court about your relationship with your niece, Madison Clark? Brenda took a deep, shuddering breath and dabbed the corner of her eye with a pristine, folded tissue. She is like a daughter to me, she began, her voice catching. When my beloved sister passed away, God rest her soul, there was no question. My husband Robert and I, we opened our home and our hearts to her. We didn't have much, Your Honor, but what we had, we shared. The performance was breathtaking in its audacity. She spun a tale of heroic self-sacrifice. She spoke of sleepless nights when I was sick with the flu, of how she'd held my head and wiped my brow. The reality was her sighing in exasperation and leaving a bottle of children's Tylenol and a glass of water outside my attic door. She talked about scrimping and saving to buy my school supplies, conveniently omitting that she'd hand me a $5 bill and tell me to make it last. We had to make sacrifices, she said, her voice rising with passion. Big ones. We canceled a trip to Disney World. The children were devastated because we had another mouth to feed. I had to give up my dream of going back to community college to get my associate's degree because Madison needed me at home. She gestured vaguely toward the gallery. Our own children had to go without at times. Lisa wanted new ice skates for her birthday, but we had to buy Madison a new winter coat instead. This was a masterful lie, a twisted version of a memory I had tried to forget. I did get a new winter coat that year, but only after my homeroom teacher sent a note home expressing concern that my current jacket was 2 sizes too small and had a broken zipper. Brenda had been shamed into it, and Lisa did get her ice skates. I remembered the beautiful white leather boots and their shining blades, a stark contrast to the worn, secondhand sneakers I wore through the slush and snow. Brenda's lawyer then produced his key piece of evidence, a large accordion file overflowing with receipts. He dramatically dumped the contents onto the evidence table. Your Honor, he announced, these are just some of the receipts Mrs. Harrison kept over the years. Groceries, utility bills, school fees, a decade of expenses, a decade of love. The pile of paper was a potent visual. It looked like proof. It looked like sacrifice. I watched as the judge peered down at the mountain of faded receipts, his expression softening with sympathy. The relatives behind me murmured their approval. Such a good woman, I heard one of my aunts whisper. That poor girl doesn't know how lucky she was. The humiliation was a physical sensation. Like swallowing hot coals, she was erasing my reality, rewriting my history in front of an audience, and they were all applauding. Every memory of my neglect, my hunger, my loneliness was being painted over with her lies. I felt my composure begin to crack, my hands clenching into fists under the table. I was that little girl again, sitting alone at the kitchen counter, forced to listen to a story of a happy family that I would never be a part of. The only difference was that this time, the whole world was listening, too. After Brenda's lawyer concluded her testimony with a flourish, she stepped down from the stand, avoiding my gaze, but casting a look of sorrowful martyrdom toward the gallery. She had played her part perfectly. The air in the room was thick with sympathy for her. I could feel it. The judge, a man who had likely seen countless messy family disputes, looked down at me with an expression that seemed to say, let's get this over with. Ms. Clark, he said, his voice a low rumble of judicial weariness. This is a civil matter, but the testimony has been compelling. Do you have a response to your aunt's claim? This was the precipice. The moment the entire proceeding, and perhaps my entire life, hinged upon. For a split second, the terrified 8-year-old inside me wanted to run, to hide, to simply agree to pay whatever she wanted just to make it stop. The shame she had so expertly cultivated for a decade was a powerful, paralyzing force. But then I looked at her. I saw the faint, triumphant curl of her lips. I saw the smug satisfaction in my cousin Lisa's eyes, and the fear was consumed by a cold, hard resolve. I had not clawed my way out of the darkness just to let her drag me back in. I took a deep, centering breath and stood, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the polished floor. The room fell silent. Yes, Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside me. I do. I gave a subtle nod to my lawyer, a sharp, brilliant woman named Sarah who I'd hired from another firm. We knew it was crucial for me not to represent myself. I needed the objective professional buffer. Sarah stood with a quiet confidence that instantly commanded attention. Your Honor, she began, her voice crisp and clear, the plaintiff, Mrs. Harrison, has built her case on a foundation of alleged financial hardship and personal sacrifice. We believe it is therefore essential to establish a clear and accurate picture of Mrs. Harrison's actual financial status during the 10-year period she served as my client's legal guardian. Sarah walked toward the clerk. carrying a heavy, meticulously organized binder. It was my folder, my truth, translated into the irrefutable language of legal exhibits. We would like to enter into evidence a series of documents, beginning with Exhibit A. A court officer handed a copy to the judge, and another to Brenda's stunned-looking lawyer. Sarah placed the document on the overhead projector, and the image filled the screen at the front of the courtroom. It was a certified statement from the Social Security Administration. Exhibit A, Sarah announced, her voice resonating through the silent room, is a complete record of survivor benefit payments issued to Brenda Harrison as fiduciary for the minor child, Madison Clark. As you can see, for a period of 120 consecutive months, Mrs. Harrison received a monthly check. The initial amount was $987 per month, with cost of living adjustments over the years. The total amount of federal aid Mrs. Harrison received, which was legally designated for the sole purpose of my client's care and well-being, was $134,562. A low gasp rippled through the gallery. I saw my Uncle Robert's head snap toward Brenda, his eyes wide with disbelief. Brenda's face had gone ashen, the color draining from her cheeks as if a plug had been pulled. Her lawyer was flipping through his copy of the document, his brow furrowed in a panic. Now for Exhibit B, Sarah continued, unflustered. She replaced the first document with a second. This is the payout confirmation from a life insurance policy taken out by my client's mother, Eleanor Clark. As you can see, upon her death, the sole beneficiary, Brenda Harrison, received a one-time lump sum payment of $75,000. The policy writer explicitly states these funds were intended for the upbringing, welfare, and future educational needs of Madison Clark. The combined total now exceeded $200,000. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. The narrative was cracking, the foundation of Brenda's story turning to dust. But Sarah was just warming up. The plaintiff has testified that she and her family made significant sacrifices, foregoing vacations and other luxuries. With that in mind, we would like to present Exhibit C, Mrs. Harrison's subpoenaed bank statements from July of 2008. She projected a new image. It was a standard bank statement, a dry list of debits and credits. With a laser pointer, Sarah highlighted a line item. Here, on July 5th, we see the deposit of the monthly Social Security check. And here, she moved the red dot down the page. On July 7th, we see a cash withdrawal of $5,000. The location of the ATM is listed right here. The Tropicana Casino, Atlantic City, New Jersey. The silence that followed was different. It was not mere quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. Every eye in the room was now fixed on my aunt. Her face, which had been pale, was now flushing a deep, mottled red. Her carefully constructed facade of the gentle, suffering martyr did not just crack. It shattered into a million pieces. The sound of that shattering was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The image of the casino withdrawal slip hung in the air, a silent, damning indictment. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom seemed to hum with a new intensity, and the room, once filled with whispers, was now gripped by a stunning, absolute silence. I watched my Aunt Brenda, whose entire case rested on the fiction of her poverty and sacrifice. Her face had gone from the pale shade of shock to a blotchy, furious red. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table. Her lawyer, the man with the slicked back hair, was leaning in, whispering frantically to her, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes, narrowed and filled with a venom I knew all too well, were locked on me. "Objection, Your Honor," her lawyer finally managed to stammer, standing up shakily. "Relevance. My client's personal financial decisions have no bearing on the cost of raising a child." The judge, who had been leaning forward with keen interest, now leaned back in his chair, his expression hard as granite. "Overruled," he said, his voice sharp. "Your client opened this door when she claimed financial hardship as the basis for her entire suit. You presented a mountain of grocery receipts to paint a picture of poverty. The defense is entitled to present evidence that challenges that picture. Please proceed, counsel." My lawyer, Sarah, gave a slight, confident nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." She turned her attention back to the screen. "We have dozens of such records. For example, Exhibit D from March of 2010. The same month, Mrs. Harrison informed my client's school that she could not afford the $60 fee for a class trip to the Science Museum. This statement shows a payment of $840 to Nordstrom for a designer handbag." She clicked to the next slide. Exhibit E from the summer of 2012, a summer Mrs. Harrison testified was spent staying home to save money. These are credit card statements showing charges for a 7-day Caribbean cruise for two. With each new piece of evidence, another brick was torn from the facade of her life. The gallery was in an uproar of hushed, shocked chatter. I could see my relatives turning to look at each other, their faces a canvas of confusion and dawning horror. They had come here to see me put in my place, to witness the final act of my supposed ingratitude. Instead, they were watching the public dissection of a woman they thought they knew. Sarah paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle in the room. Then she said, "Your Honor, I would like to call the plaintiff, Brenda Harrison, back to the stand for cross-examination." The judge nodded. "Mrs. Harrison, please retake the stand." She moved like a robot, her steps stiff and jerky. When she sat down, she looked smaller, diminished. The soft, matronly mask was gone, replaced by a tight, pinched expression of pure fury. Sarah approached her calmly. "Mrs. Harrison," she began, her voice even and devoid of malice, "you testified under oath that you made immense financial sacrifices to raise my client. Is that correct?" "Yes," Brenda snapped, her voice raspy. "I did. And you testified that you canceled a family vacation to Disney World because you had another mouth to feed. Do you stand by that testimony?" "Yes. Yet, your bank records show that in the year following my client's arrival, you and your family took a vacation to a ski resort in Vermont. The charges for the lodge, ski rentals, and meals totaled over $6,000. Was that not a vacation, Mrs. Harrison?" Brenda sputtered. "That was different. That was a family trip, Robert's work. It was a bonus. A bonus you failed to mention when you were describing your dire financial straits," Sarah noted. She moved on. "Mrs. Harrison, let's talk about the $75,000 life insurance payout from your sister's policy. The funds were designated for Madison's care. Can you please tell the court how you used that money for her benefit?" Brenda's eyes darted around the room looking for an escape. I used it for household expenses. For her. For all of us. It all went into one pot. It paid the mortgage. It put food on the table. Did it?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously soft. She held up another document. "Because this is a statement from a high-yield savings account, opened the day after you received the insurance payout. The opening deposit was for $50,000. The account was in your name only. Over the next 5 years, that money was not used for mortgage payments or groceries. It was used, according to the records, as a down payment on a new luxury SUV and to pay for your daughter Lisa's lavish Sweet 16 party. Did Madison's welfare include a new car for you, Mrs. Harrison?" That was the breaking point. The last thread of her composure snapped. Brenda shot up from her seat, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage. She pointed a trembling finger not at Sarah, but directly at me. "You!" she shrieked, her voice raw and ugly, tearing through the courtroom's decorum. "You ungrateful little witch. After everything I did for you, everything I gave up." Her lawyer was on his feet. "Brenda, sit down!" But she couldn't be stopped. The dam of a decade of resentment had burst. "I gave you a roof over your head. I kept you out of the system. You were nothing but a mistake my sister made, and I got stuck with you." The courtroom fell into a deathly silence. The only sound was her own ragged breathing. Her words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "That girl was a millstone around my neck from the day she arrived," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I should have left her in foster care. I should have let the state take her. God, I wish I'd never laid eyes on her." The mask was not just cracked, it was vaporized. This was the real Brenda. This was the woman who had haunted my childhood, whose resentment I had felt in every cold dinner, in every handed-down sweater, in every dismissive word. It was a monstrous, horrifying confession, but in the deepest, most wounded part of my soul, it was something else too. It was validation. I hadn't imagined it. The hatred was real, and now, finally, everyone could see it. In the ringing silence that followed my aunt's outburst, a profound shift occurred. The entire atmosphere of the room had been irrevocably altered. The case was no longer about $50,000. It was about the raw, ugly truth that had just been laid bare for all to see. Brenda stood trembling, her face a mess of rage and shock at her own admission, before collapsing back into the witness chair as if her bones had turned to dust. Her lawyer looked defeated, running a hand over his face in a gesture of utter surrender. The gallery was a tableau of stunned faces. My relatives, who had come to support their sister, now looked at her as if she were a stranger. My cousins, Lisa and Mark, were pale, their eyes wide with a horror that seemed, for the first time, to be on my behalf. The judge, his face an unreadable mask of judicial calm, let the silence hang for a moment longer before speaking. His voice, when it came, was cold and sharp. "Counsel, please get your client under control." He then turned his gaze to me. It was a gaze that had transformed from weary impatience to something else entirely, a focused, serious attention. "Ms. Clark," he said, his voice softer than before. "In light of that testimony, does the defense have anything further to add?" This was my moment. Sarah had laid the factual groundwork, brick by methodical brick. My aunt, in her rage, had just provided the venomous mortar that held it all together. Now it was my turn to build the final wall, to give voice to the decade of silence that had been suffocating me. I felt Sarah's hand gently touch my arm, a silent question. I gave her a small, firm nod. I would speak. I stood up, my legs feeling surprisingly steady beneath me. I didn't have a prepared speech. I only had the truth, a truth that had been my shadow for 20 years. I didn't address the judge, or my lawyer, or the gallery. I turned slightly and spoke directly to the collapsed figure of my aunt. "You're right about one thing," I began, my voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. "You shouldn't have taken me in. Not like that, because you didn't raise me. You curated a performance of raising me for the outside world, but within the walls of your house you made sure I knew I was a prisoner of your charity." I took a step forward. "You talk about the roof over my head, but you don't talk about how you put it in the attic, where I was out of sight and out of mind. You talk about the food you gave me, but you don't talk about how I ate my meals alone at a kitchen counter like a servant, while your family laughed together in the next room. You don't talk about the nights I went to bed hungry because you'd gambled away the money that was supposed to feed me." Her head jerked up, her eyes flashing with renewed hatred, but she said nothing. She had no words left. "You talk about sacrifices," I continued, my voice gaining strength, but the only sacrifice was mine. I sacrificed a normal childhood. I sacrificed the right to feel loved and wanted. I sacrificed the belief that I had any worth outside of what I could do for other people. You didn't teach me character. You taught me that I was a burden. You taught me to be silent, to be invisible, to apologize for the very space I occupied. The money is almost secondary. You stole more than that. You stole my mother's last gift to me. The money she left behind was her final act of love, her way of trying to protect me even after she was gone. And you took that love, that protection, and you spent it on cruises and casinos and handbags. You desecrated her memory every time you swiped your credit card. Tears were finally welling in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. So no, I don't owe you $50,000. I don't owe you gratitude. I don't owe you anything. You owe me a debt that can't be calculated in a courtroom. You owe me my childhood back, and you can never, ever repay it. I finished and stood there, my heart hammering, the air electric. The truth was finally out, spoken in my own voice. It was liberating. Sarah stood beside me. "Your Honor," she said gently, "we have a few final pieces of corroborating evidence." She didn't need to do it. The case was won. But this was about leaving no shadow of a doubt. This was about honoring the child I had been. "We would like to submit into evidence Exhibit F, excerpts from Madison Clark's childhood diary." She projected a scanned page onto the screen. My own childish handwriting, loopy and uncertain, filled the space. Sarah read it aloud. October 12th, 2007. "Dear Mom, I wish you were here. Aunt Brenda was mad again today. She said I eat too much and that I'm costing her a fortune. I tried to only eat half of my sandwich at lunch so it would cost less. I miss you. Love, Madison." She followed it with a report card from my 7th grade teacher, which noted, "Madison is a bright student, but is extremely withdrawn and quiet. She often seems sad and comes to school in clothes that are not adequate for the weather. I have concerns about her home environment." Finally, Sarah presented a sworn affidavit from that same teacher, a woman I hadn't seen in 15 years but who remembered me. She described in the affidavit a parent-teacher conference where she had tried to gently raise her concerns, only to be met with Brenda's indignant fury. Brenda had accused her of meddling and stormed out, claiming the school was trying to tell her how to raise her charity case. It was all there. A complete devastating mosaic of neglect, greed, and cruelty. My quiet words, backed by the irrefutable proof of the past. There was nothing left for my aunt to hide behind. Her world of lies had been completely and utterly dismantled. The final phase of the hearing was a formality, a ghost of a legal proceeding. Brenda's lawyer, looking pale and utterly defeated, waived his right to a closing argument with a simple, dejected shake of his head. He knew there was nothing left to say. His client had not only lost the case, she had incinerated it with her own words. Sarah stood for our closing statement, but she didn't address the evidence further. She didn't need to. Instead, she spoke about the principle of the matter. "Your Honor," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, righteous anger. "This was never a case about money. It was about exploitation. It was about a woman who saw a grieving child not as a niece to be loved, but as an opportunity to be leveraged. She took control of hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for that child's welfare and used it to fund a lifestyle of leisure and luxury, all while subjecting that same child to a decade of emotional abuse and neglect. And when the money ran out, and the child grew up and found her own success, the greed did not end. She came back for more. She filed this lawsuit, a final, audacious act of exploitation, believing she could profit one last time from the girl whose childhood she had already stolen. Justice in this case is not just about denying her claim. It's about recognizing this predatory behavior for what it is. She sat down. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. The judge looked down at his notes for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then he removed his glasses, set them down on the bench, and looked directly at Brenda. Every bit of weariness was gone from his face, replaced by an expression of profound, judicial contempt. "Mrs. Brenda Harrison," he began, his voice low and cutting. "Please rise." Brenda struggled to her feet, her body trembling. "You came into this courtroom seeking $50,000, the judge said, his voice resonating with cold authority. "You presented yourself as a martyr, a selfless caregiver who sacrificed everything for her orphaned niece. You wept on the stand. You presented receipts for groceries as proof of your hardship. It was quite a performance." He let the words hang in the air. "But the evidence presented here today has told a very different story. It has not told a story of sacrifice. It has told a story of a decade of calculated, systematic fraud. It has told a story of the misappropriation of Social Security benefits. It has told a story of the flagrant misuse of life insurance funds. It has told a story of a woman who, while claiming to be destitute, was taking luxury cruises and gambling away thousands of dollars in casinos, money that belonged to a child. Your niece." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into her. "But this is not just about financial fraud. I have listened to the testimony. I have read the diary entries and the teacher's reports. This court has been given a glimpse into the profound and sustained emotional abuse you inflicted upon a vulnerable child who was placed in your care. You did not just steal her inheritance. You systematically attempted to steal her self-worth." His voice rose, filled with a fury that was all the more powerful for being so controlled. "And after all that, for you to have the audacity to come into a court of law and attempt to profit a second time from the very child you so thoroughly exploited, it is an act of breathtaking cruelty and avarice that this court will not dignify. I find your claim to be not only baseless, but frankly, abhorrent." He picked up his gavel. "Therefore, the plaintiff's claim for $50,000 is dismissed with prejudice." The first bang of the gavel echoed like a gunshot. "That is the end of the civil matter," he continued, his voice dropping again, becoming even more chilling. "However, I am not finished. Based on the overwhelming evidence of financial malfeasance presented here today, this court is referring the entirety of this case, the bank records, the insurance documents, the sworn testimony, all of it, to the district attorney's office for immediate investigation into multiple counts of felony fraud, wire fraud, and potential child endangerment." Brenda made a small, choking sound. "You came here today seeking $50,000. Mrs. Harrison," the judge concluded, his eyes like chips of ice, "you may be leaving with a criminal indictment and the prospect of a prison sentence. This court is adjourned." He slammed the gavel down one final time. The sound was deafening. Brenda's knees seemed to buckle. She collapsed into her chair, her face a mask of utter devastation. Her lawyer dropped his head into his hands, not even looking at her. The grand performance was over. The truth had won. And the justice was more complete and terrible than I had ever dared to imagine. The moments after the judge left the bench were a blur of noise and motion. A court officer moved to stand quietly near my aunt's table. The whispers in the gallery erupted into open conversation. I felt Sarah's hand on my shoulder, a firm, grounding pressure. "You did it, Madison," she whispered. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. My body felt strangely light, as if a physical weight I had been carrying for 20 years had just dissolved into thin air. As we packed our briefcases, I avoided looking at Brenda. I didn't want to see her despair. I didn't feel triumph or a thirst for revenge. I just felt quiet. The roaring storm that had been inside me for as long as I could remember had finally passed, leaving behind a calm, clean silence. We walked out of the courtroom and into the wide marble hallway, and there, waiting for me, were my cousins. Mark stood awkwardly, his hands shoved in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor. Lisa was beside him, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. The smugness was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling shame. Mark was the first to speak, his voice barely a whisper. Maddie, I'm so sorry. He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a genuine, painful regret. I'm so sorry, I knew. I didn't know about the money, not like that. But I knew how she treated you. I knew it wasn't right. We'd get new clothes and you'd get our old stuff. We'd have cake and you'd be in the kitchen washing dishes. I saw it all, and I never said anything. I was just a kid, but that's no excuse. I was a coward. I am so sorry, Lisa then spoke, her voice thick with tears. I was awful, she said, her words tumbling out. I was a spoiled brat. I liked being the favorite. I liked getting all the attention. I treated you like you were nothing, because that's what she taught us to do. Seeing her in there, hearing what she said, what she really is. I can't believe it. I can't believe we were a part of it. I'm sorry, Madison. I looked at them, these two people who had been the architects of so much of my childhood misery, and I felt a surprising wave of, not exactly forgiveness, but of understanding. They were children then, too, caught in the gravitational pull of a manipulative parent. They were complicit, but she was the source of the poison. Thank you for saying that, I said, and my voice was steady. It means something to finally hear it. I didn't offer them a hug. I didn't tell them it was all okay. Some wounds are too deep for easy platitudes. But I offered them the truth. The apology mattered. It was a small, crucial piece of the past clicking into its rightful place. We stood there for a moment in an awkward, silent truce. Three adults reckoning with a childhood that had damaged us all in different ways. In the weeks and months that followed, life settled into a new kind of normal. The district attorney did press charges against Brenda. The case was overwhelming and she ended up taking a plea deal, 5 years of probation, a court-ordered repayment of a portion of the Social Security funds to the government, and a felony conviction that would follow her for the rest of her life. She lost her house. Uncle Robert, humiliated, filed for divorce. Her world, built on a foundation of lies and stolen money, had crumbled completely. I felt no joy in her downfall, only a quiet, somber sense of closure. Her punishment was the natural consequence of her choices. My victory was not in her ruin, but in my own freedom. The rage I had carried for so long was gone. The deep, aching sadness was still there, a faint scar on my soul, but it no longer defined me. I had faced the monster of my past, and I had won. Not by being louder or more vicious, but by arming myself with the simple, unassailable truth. I poured myself into my work with a renewed sense of purpose. A few months after the hearing, I took on a pro bono case representing a 17-year-old girl in the foster system whose guardian was siphoning off her college fund. As I sat across from her, listening to her story of quiet neglect and financial betrayal, I saw a reflection of myself. But this time I wasn't the victim. I was the advocate. I was the one with the law degree, the one who knew how to fight back. I could use my own pain, my own story, as a shield and a sword for others. I had found a way to transform the ugliest chapter of my life into something meaningful, something that could create justice in the world. I was finally at peace. My aunt wanted $50,000 for raising me. What she got instead was the truth laid bare, and the consequences that came with it. For years I believed her story, that I was a burden, that I was worthless, that I owed her an unpayable debt. But in the end, justice did come. Not loudly or with anger, but with the quiet, undeniable weight of evidence and truth. Sometimes the family you're given won't give you love, but that doesn't mean you can't build a life of your own, a life filled with strength, purpose, and peace. You can become your own rescuer. If you believe that the truth always comes to light and that justice is worth fighting for, hit like, subscribe, and please, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters.